Trent Reznor.
We're here with Trent Reznor.
Trent Reznor. 9 Inch Nails' Trent Reznor.
Trent Reznor is the talented founder and frontman for one of rock's most popular groups, 9 Inch Nails.
Trent Reznor is regarded as one of the most creative minds in music. His music has provided solace for millions of listeners across the world. Without a doubt, the album that cemented his place in history, as well as bring to the forefront the multitude of struggles he's endured, is The Downward Spiral. Today we discuss one of music's most influential albums. The Downward Spiral is the second studio album released by 9 Inch Nails. The project was fully released on March 8, 1994 by Nothing Records. The album follows a sole protagonist throughout his agonizing journey into destruction and eventual suicide. The project brings to the forefront the scope of Reznor's struggles, closely resembling how he himself too feels. The beauty of the project is that the listener can place themselves in the protagonist's shoes or anyone else they choose. This album can be whatever the listener wants it to be, providing a story for everybody. The Downward Spiral captures apathy, melancholy self-acceptance, and living agony like no other. When crafting the album, Reznor moved himself into 10050 CeeLo Drive in Benedict Canyon, Los Angeles, the site of the murder of actress Sharon Tate by members of the Manson family in 1969. This location would become a pivotal piece in encapsulating the overall feeling of the album, pushing Reznor's subconscious further to the surface of his pen. The Downward Spiral was a stark contrast to 9 Inch Nails' first studio album, Pretty Hate Machine, as it would steer the musical focus from heavy synth-pop sounds to industrial rock, techno, and ambient soundscapes. The feeling of disassociation parodies a carelessness, a freedom of being detached from the world, your current life, and everything bringing you pain. Isolation, depravity, and introspection culminate into depression, solitude, pain, self-hate, and eventually acceptance. All of these tied together to form the major themes of the Downward Spiral and reflect Trent's struggles during this time. Being self-aware and understanding how he was feeling was essential to being able to accurately express this through his music. Soon after 9 Inch Nails performed at Lollapalooza, Reznor began formulating the blueprint for the Downward Spiral.
Drawing upon was a definite negative vibe, and although it was powerful, it's ultimately not the end of the road, but a means towards something else. I'm not sure what that is, but I kind of came up with the idea of Downward Spiral, which I knew would be a pretty harrowing exploration of that.
Fame and success had brought money and a level of comfortability, but it also left the artist feeling empty, trapped in a world he was struggling to understand, in the shell of what was supposed to be a rock star. The difficulties of being loved by millions while hating who you are followed Reznor during this time. Drug addiction, depression, and self-loathing were major parts of Reznor's life at this time and served as an allegory for the project. A major key in separating this album in the world of music was the unconventional use of instruments, digital sound creating, and experimentation. The Downward Spiral wanted to create more than simple sound. The goal was to provide the listener with an unmatched feel of texture and space. Reznor stayed away from conventional instruments and sound palettes and chose to use music programs to invert and manipulate frequencies as well as sounds on the project. Reznor described the project as consisting of someone who sheds everything around them to a potential nothingness, but through career, religion, relationship, belief, and so on. The path the protagonist takes to arrive at complete nothingness and self-destruction is just as important as the end result. Stripping yourself of everything that provides meaning, Your career, religion, relationships, and core beliefs forces the listener to be put into a place of complete depravity. If none of these things matter, then what's the point of living? The downward spiral forces you to ask yourself the tough questions surrounding life, love, and the pursuit of happiness. Reznor recalls struggling to complete the album, facing pressure from his record label and major writer's block. It wasn't until producer Rick Rubin told Reznor that the album might not be finished until he makes music that is allowed to be heard. This simple statement made a world of difference with Reznor, spurring his creativity and showing him that he could in fact finish this project. After finally completing the album, Reznor recounted feeling completely drained, both mentally and physically, by handing the finished product to executives and simply saying, "I'm sorry." Reznor believed the project was too dark and too experimental for the masses, and this would be a disappointment to the record label.
I realized that it wasn't going to be a big commercial success type record. There wasn't any real singles on there. And it worked as a chunk of art, I thought, but not so much as someone say, "Let me hear something off your new record." And it was like, it's better to just hear the whole thing a couple times and understand what's going on.
The complete opposite of this happened, a paradox of sorts. The ugliness, unconventionalism, and darkness of the project was what made it wildly successful, showing that good music, regardless of the mainstream appeal, can succeed. The downward spiral would go on to go 4 times platinum, changing Reznor's life and the landscape of music forever. In 1994, the album would be publicly released to immediate success, selling 119,000 copies in the first week and appearing at number 2 on the US Billboard 200. The downward spiral would go on to influence bands like As Gravity Kills, Stabbing Westward, and Filter. Looking back on the project, Trent would describe it as an extension of himself that became the truth fulfilling itself, as he experienced personal and social issues presented in this album after it's released. He had already struggled with social anxiety and depression and started his abuse of narcotics, including cocaine, while he went on an alcohol binge. Around this time, his studio perfectionism, struggles with addiction, and bouts of writer's block prolonged the production of The Fragile, and Reznor completed rehabilitation from drugs in 2001. The Downward Spiral is timeless. It's an essential album for almost any listener, especially those struggling with mental illness or wanting to further understand mental illness. Life isn't always pretty. We often find ourselves struggling to find purpose, self-acceptance, and an understanding for ourselves and those around us. The Downward Spiral is raw, dirty, and authentic, offering feeling and some kind of explanation of these existential questions. Whether you've heard this project before or not at all, it's a must listen. The Downward Spiral. Raw, authentic, transformative, timeless.
It came down to really just sitting down and facing myself again and remembering that playing music was what always saved me in the past and made me feel like I had something to offer.